Welcome to the Curiosity Solution. I'm your host, Beverly Beal. Join us as we explore the science of curiosity, share stories of people who've used curiosity to improve their lives, and maybe inspire some aha moments along the way. Welcome back to the Curiosity Solution. This is my favorite. Well, I can't say my favorite because I have almost all favorites, except for this woman, Stephanie Crain. She is describes herself as a corporate mystic. So in addition to being a leadership coach, she brings just enough woo to the world where she gets to help executives who are also tapping into that inspiration and that intuition. I'm so excited to talk to her because I never even just introduced myself. I'm Beverly Beal. I'm your host of the Curiosity Solution, because you can tell I'm just so excited about talking here with Stephanie. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Thank you, first of all, for such a joyful introduction. I appreciate that so much. And you know, it's interesting because I have this saying where if you take the word pragmatic and you rearrange it, you get the words part magic. And so that's
Okay,
sort
I'm
of
writing that down.
my approach in business, is to bring the magic into the pragmatic and to sort of help people, you know, elevate into their highest self and tap into all that creative energy that often gets sort of set aside in business spaces, but is really valuable for us, you know, so.
Well, because again, when you're talking about creativity, especially with, well, I think every industry has to tap into that, as you say, the magic,
Mhm.
the that creative spark, you know, the divine burst. You know, why else would they be in business anyway? Why else? What else was asking to be birthed into the world? You know, and
Yeah.
maybe it's a very basic need like an auto part, or it could be something even more spectacular like the person who made your earrings, because
Yes.
those are awesome.
Thank you.
So tell me some more about how are you, you know, how did you even get into this? I mean, you can't have just come out of the womb and say, I'm going to be a corporate mystic.
It's a really good question, and it has definitely been a lifelong professional journey and personal journey too. You know, I started out in business. I like to say I came into business in non-traditional ways, and I did that like most non-traditional people, which is through sales. It's like,
Same, same.
and so you know, I learned a lot. I think coming into business through sales, you really have an opportunity to actually get a crash course in business if that hasn't been your path leading up to that point. And you just learn so much about how business works and how it functions, and then also maybe whether or not sales is good for you. And so for me, it wasn't. And I moved into marketing because, at least through the lens that I was looking at business, marketing seemed like the natural creative path and the only creative path in a true sort of creative sense. Of course, going into marketing, I quickly realized, no, marketing is like a beast, and it combines the entire spectrum of the mind, from the most logical, detail-oriented duties to incredibly creative work that happens. But what I really noticed was that the way creativity was defined in business is just so limiting. And then the way creativity is approached in business is very diminishing. And so over time, we have both limited how we look at creativity. So like you were bringing up, you know, like bringing a product into space, or, you know, coming, you know, creating, you know, it's like, I think like, God, if you set up a really great spreadsheet, you're pretty creative. Um, you know, it's like, but we tend to define creativity as like, oh, are you an artist? Oh,
Mm.
okay. And so we really,
With the almost little proverbial pat, you know, patting people on the head. It's like, oh, isn't that cute?
yeah, it's really, creativity is actually really diminished and sort of not valued the way it needs to be in corporate spaces. And you know, over time, you know, I talk about logos and pathos, logo in the space of who we are as people, right?
Hmm.
And in the world of business, logos is so elevated that we actually define our businesses by something we call a logo. And so it's so, the ideal of logos being logic driven and structure and, everything ordered. And so pathos is, your emotions and chaos, but that's also where creativity comes from. And we've tried to divide these things into very structured boxes, but pathos, doesn't want to fit there. So
Well,
that's really
oh, go
what
ahead.
started me.
Okay, yeah. So like for me, as I'm listening to you, it naturally, your logos and pathos explanations naturally fit into the feng shui concept of yin and yang. With yin being the more feminine, grounded, uh, but also a little bit more. Some of the terms have been used as called submissive feminine, and many people look at that as less than, because in traditional cultures, specifically, well, majority of the one like China, where everything came from, the yang was the warrior, the masculine, the action. We're taking action. We're doing the things. We're lining everything up. But you have to have that balance. And I think you're exactly right. We're finally entering into an era where intuition is being more honored, having where they're putting more emphasis on the emotional intelligence. That was the word I was looking for.
Absolutely. And the challenge is that we've worked so hard over the last couple of generations of leadership. We've worked so hard to sort of tamp down that emotional energy and keep it controlled and contained, that we've actually we've diminished our emotional intelligence. So now we have people that are more stressed. They become more easily triggered. They're not as capable of, like, in order to really truly be creative, like, it's really hard to be creative when you're like super stressed out, right? Like that, those energies don't usually work well together, and so maybe you can use creativity to work through some stress, but to be like creative on demand, so to speak, in the way that the corporate world might think about it, is very challenging. And I've been doing a persona archetype test now for about a year, and I created it on my own. I developed actually about 36 corporate persona types, and then I took 6 of them specifically and created a test around it. And I've tested now nearly 2,000 people in over 100 countries. And so the archetypes are the big boss, the office parent, the analyzer, the networker, the entrepreneur, and the creative. And what I have discovered, and it's stunning to me, and it's been very interesting to explore this with people. Big boss, so I call it divine masculine and divine feminine. Okay, even though my archetype images for the big boss are opposite, so I have a female image for the big boss and I have a male image for the office parent, but they are the top scoring at 28% for the office parent and 26% for the big boss. Most people show up in corporate spaces with that energy. They're either directive, authoritative, or they're there trying to create harmony in the environment and nurture people's needs. Not even in a bad way. These aren't even negative stereotypes. The other ones fall in around 13 or 15%, somewhere in that range. The creatives, out of almost 2,000 people, have 56 creatives. It's about a little over 3%. And most people score 0 on creative. And it's interesting because I've been actually seeking out people who I know show up in corporate spaces as creative. When I took the test, I scored 48% on creative. It's not an easy test. It takes like 20 minutes to take it. And for me, it's not even like I could memorize it and, make myself answer it that way. It really is challenging you. So as I'm finding people who are comfortable showing up and expressing themselves, say with whatever, who they are. I have purple hair. I'm going to walk like, be that way wherever I'm at, right? Those people show up high as creative on my test. But I'll have people who are literally, they're artists for a living, and they'll score 0 on creative and will argue with me until I ask them, well, do you bring that energy into corporate spaces? Like, are you able to be creative in a corporate environment? And they'll be like, no, I'm not. I'm like, well, that's what this is testing for. It's not telling you you're not creative. It's telling you you don't feel comfortable expressing creativity. And I think that's because corporate has really judged what creativity means. And we are all accepting that.
When So again, when it comes back to judging people for their creativity, that brings me to thinking about. So my degree I have a journalism degree from the University of Kansas, and with a specific trend towards broadcast sales and promotions. So working in radio and TV, mostly radio at the time, there had to be a lot of creativity to write write any kind of a commercial that was only auditory.
Mhm.
And yet, you're right, it's very difficult to do that creativity on demand. The hardest shift for me was when I got a job with Procter and Gamble, and I was working for them for 7 years. You're right. There just was no room really for when you had these boundaries, and you could be as creative as you wanted to in between those boundaries. If you strayed, that just it was a bad idea. You
Mhm.
were tended to get reprimanded. Have you found, of those creatives that showed up, um, what was the split between men and women?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, first and foremost, and this may interest a lot, I don't ask that question on the test. I don't test for gender. And I do actually challenge whether or not it matters. I think it's how we judge things. So, for example, we often judge women as being like very emotional in the workplace, right? And we have a judgment around that. But my experience is that men are actually very emotional in the workplace too. They just express that differently, and we judge that differently.
Mhm.
But they're no less or more emotional in any particular way that I have experienced. And when I'm taking these tests, or when these tests are offered, people have the option to schedule time with me. And so that's when I really find out who's showing up.
Mhm.
And it's very surprising. I speak to a lot of men who struggle, deeply struggle with developing empathetic relationships with their employees, working with the people who show up with that creative energy. But in this very small group of people who are showing up as creatives, I feel that at least in what I've been exposed to, it's fairly equal. Like this, I think that we're really conditioned to sort of like pigeonhole and stereotype ourselves based on gender in so many different ways that again, it goes back to like, how are you defining creative? How are you defining emotional? How are you defining what these things look like and mean? Because that has as much to do with how we're judging it and what we're defining, how we're stereotyping it, I guess, and the bias that we bring into that. So I try to remove a little bit of that bias in a particular way because I just want to see sort of like how is humanity showing up. And when I look at my followers, right, my followers actually are pretty even. So they're 60-40, 60 female, 40% men. I've got over 200,000 followers. So,
Mhm.
it's a fairly I feel like I'm getting a fairly balanced sampling, even though I'm not asking for that gender question specifically.
I was just curious about that because you're right. I mean, I know I'm coming in with a little bit of that bias myself. Uh, I think we all have that. Again, growing up, in just even in my own family, it was far more valued for the my brothers to to not be emotional, even though my father was a Pisces, very emotional. He didn't always show it, but you could feel it.
Sure.
But I also remember getting a lot of grief because I was that emotional teenager, uh, all over the board. And my dad would not know how to handle that. And so I think you're right. I think a lot of men are still learning how to be comfortable with the full range of emotions, not just outside of themselves, but within themselves. And there is a level of creativity that has to be present in order to navigate that fast moving water of the emotions.
I always will come back to like, how are you taught to judge something? So for example, let's take the word chaos, which I used earlier. And we're generally taught to judge chaos as bad, but I don't.
It's true.
I see chaos as neutral. And then it has the capacity to go either direction. It's energy. That's all it is. Energy in and of itself is chaotic. It just sort of exists without form or containment. And so how is that bad? That's not bad. It just is. But we judge chaos as bad. So therefore, if emotions are rooted in chaos, then we have, it starts to create this like fear. Again, it becomes a bias. So when we talk about, my father's a Cancer, also very emotional sign. If we're looking at water signs and, the way that they relate to the world and, in that space, again, their conditioning, sometimes I have so much deep empathy for what, the hardened executive and where I think a lot of people, it's easy to be angry. It's easy to direct that anger and to project all of that towards that individual. But I look at that person and see somebody who maybe doesn't know how to really navigate their own emotional landscape. And so they just, in that capacity, they do have limitations. And for me, I can find a space of empathy for that. But that's my Libra.
Yes. And then there's my Virgo over here going, let me just fix that for you. So how long were you doing your marketing and doing all of that? You related marketing to be likened it to be a beast, because it is a very far reaching
Yes.
field that it has to connect all of the pieces in business.
Yeah.
And so how long were you doing that for others before you made that switch? And what was the motivation along the way to do that?
It's interesting. So my career where I was employed by other people working for other companies, roughly about 25 or so years. I really worked in a unbelievably diverse landscape of organizations. So every startups to publicly traded organizations, companies that were, run like by mavericks, like, like in the Wild West, to the most ordered, structured, compliant, environment you can imagine, and then everything in between, B2B, B2C. So I got the full breadth of experience working in marketing, and I would call myself a marketing generalist. But I really excelled, and I believe I did excelled in building teams of extremely talented people. And then making sure that marketing was recognized not as a resource, but as a profit driver in the context of, how we improve the business overall if we are utilized strategically. So I was really, you'll hear me sometimes sarcastically reference the "make it pretty" remark, which was just probably, if you wanted to actually make my head explode, you could be like, "Hey, can you make this look pretty?" And I'd be like, very strongly first. Okay. And so it was really, important to me to like help people understand actually how strategic creativity was and could be when given the right amount of time, when given the right kind of information, when given the right perspective. Oftentimes people come to marketing asking to fulfill a need where they've already attached themselves to the outcome of that need. I need a brochure. And you talk to them for like 5 minutes and it's like, no, you need a campaign. You need these things. You need these elements. You don't need a brochure. Actually, a brochure is going to be a huge waste of money. You need, so it was that aspect of, growing into that space and becoming more consultative in my businesses. And then eventually I just broke out and decided to be a consultant. And so I was a marketing consultant for about 7 years before I really entered into the coaching space. But I was pretty much kind of coaching my clients all along. And I just went through that process of like making that more, you know, credible and certified and, you know, getting the education behind it to like really help me understand that process.
Where did you get your education for coaching?
I am a certified master Jungian coach, and I did that through Creative Mind University. And they specialize specifically in Jungian style coaching and had a very unique program. And for me, it was it fits into the corporate mystic aspect of what I do. I've done dream interpretation, tarot, and I am a I am also certified in Kundalini yoga instruction. I have a culinary health chef certificate with an Ayurvedic specialization. So I have, you know, kind of been crafting this overall healing approach, but bringing it into corporate spaces literally for the entire time. I've done so many secret tarot reads in executive offices that I can't even, you know, it's people say they're, you know, afraid, but until you're in their office and, you know, telling, and then it's very real. And so, you know, it's just always been a part of my practice. And finally, I just said, this is who I am.
So that now brings me to one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to talk with you and wanted to interview you on this program, because, you know, again, the Curiosity Solution is all about tapping into that inner knowing, tapping into that, you know, is it your body that's informing you when it's time to make that shift? Was it something else? Was it, you know, an external sign? How do you know when the curiosity that you're feeling is a yes or a no? Where is it showing up? How is it, you know, how do you handle it? What was your sign that said, okay, let's just let it all hang out there?
You know, for me, that's an interesting question. I'm highly intuitive, and I know that I'm highly intuitive, and I'm highly intuitive for a lot of different reasons. I have a complicated medical background, and it started with surgery at birth, or, you know, as an infant, I've had roughly 25 surgeries in my life, a lot of them as a child. I woke up in surgery when I was 10 and saw myself exposed, cut open. And that caused complex PTSD that wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 30s. So I went through a long period of my life trying to understand the insanity and chaos of my being, of just who I was. And so I'd had so many experiences where I think I was hyper in tune with my body.
Mm.
I just was from a very early age, from as early as you can imagine. You know, I've never not been hyper aware of my body, and hyper aware of emotions within it. I feel emotions in very physical ways. So if I'm resistant, you know, it is absolutely going to show. You know, I'll probably like break an arm or something. I mean, like it's literally like it shows up in my body so strongly that I have to honor. I have to honor myself. It's so counterproductive to not do it. So over the years, you know, for me, like I've done things that a lot of people would look at and be like, I would never do that. I've never had a job when I quit a job, ever in my whole life.
Wow.
I have quit every job when it was the right time for me and for them, for the right reasons. You know, I've looked at every opportunity in my life as an opportunity for growth. And if I'm ignoring something within myself, it's impossible. It's like, what am I going to do? Like, just not exist? You know, it's like, no, I will be doing the thing that I need to do. So I remember, you know, I've been married for 35 years. And so I've had the joy of me and my husband raising each other as children. And, but I remember being 18 and telling my husband, like, I am important and I am supposed to do something important. And I don't know what it is, but I know I'm supposed to figure that out. And I will. And I am. And I've never not known that. So for me, it's just always been a process of moving forward, of figuring out like, what is the expansion? And it really comes down to like learning at such an early age that I needed to heal myself and then seeing so many people not know how to do that for themselves. And in the corporate space, it just makes it so hard. Just so hard. And we're so conditioned to just be sick for your job, work through it, suck it up, whatever. Like all these things that really, it's just bad for business. Like, even if we want to like take the whole, like, I care about humanity thing out of it and just be like, profit matters. It's like, that's bad for business. You're losing money, you know, if all of your people are sick. So
it costs a lot to hire and train, and the productivity loss for when there's turnover.
It's unbelievable for an average size company of around 500 on average, right? There was a study that was put out like a year or two ago, and it said like on average that company would lose $2.2 million a year on turnover.
Whoa.
That is, it's becoming unsustainable. And what's happening is like we have the gig economy coming up. So we have a lot more people that are saying, hey, I can get portable insurance anywhere. I can set my own hours. I have a skill set that's valuable. Pay me for it, you know, and that's just going to keep happening more, you know. And so organizations and companies, even if you don't want to take a humanistic approach to it, even if you just strictly want to look at it through a capitalistic lens, these are unsustainable scenarios. You know, it's like you're going to lose your staff and ruling by fear, which, by the way, kills curiosity or maybe grows it in the wrong ways, in ways that, you know, you don't want. And that's another thing too. You know, it's like when people are questioning the values of your organization and why they're there, you're in trouble. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, I personally find that you know, you can attract more flies with honey than vinegar to be a good aphorism. So
it feels better for everybody involved. I mean, it's a tastier treat, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. So when you were little, I mean, obviously growing up with so many surgeries and such a complex medical trauma, were you allowed curiosity? I mean, how did your parents handle things? I mean, obviously with the medical piece, there were recovery from surgery takes time.
It does.
And that can kind of delay some certain things. Did you experience any expanded curiosity? I mean, did your parents like try to keep you more entertained, or were they just scared to touch?
So for me, one, my parents, in this sense, I can never have enough gratitude for them. While I'm like, some people might be like, wow, that sounds semi-abusive. You know, my dad was a former Marine. So, you know, weakness is pain leaving the body. And so dad wanted me to be strong. And he didn't let me be weak. He didn't let me be a victim. And I played sports year round. I remember, you know, being like the most angry I ever was when they postponed my surgery for summer, right before softball season. And I was just like, no, like, let me out. I'll play my season, then do surgery. Right. Like, so I was so encouraged to be physical and to be strong. But I also, by the grace of somebody whose name I don't know and will never remember, but she babysat me during when I started reading when I was around 3 years old. And by the time I was in kindergarten, I went to a 6th grade class to read books with the 6th graders. And I was reading full-blown novels by the time I was 9. And so I was always like extreme. My parents, it was really interesting because while creativity wasn't very encouraged, curiosity absolutely was. And so that might seem strange, right? Like creativity was sort of devalued in a particular way, like, you know, starving artist, or you can't make money doing it, because, you know, there was very much that path of success that mattered. But being curious was, I think, something very, you know, we were definitely encouraged to be independent, strong, you know, just live our lives. And we did that. So, yeah.
So do you indulge your creativity now? Or are you, how do you, besides your hair, how are you indulging your creativity these days?
Oh my God. I wish I could just like turn my computer around, show you my desk is like sitting right next to me is my art magic deck. Okay. Like
Wait, was that yours? Did you make that?
No.
Oh, okay.
Some other beautiful soul created this incredibly beautiful deck this just, it's an inspiration deck for creativity. That's literally what it's for. I am creative every single day of my life in so many ways. And I just drew it was so funny. It made me laugh because I just drew a Oracle card right before, and I got the creator. That's the card that I drew. And when I was reading it said, unleash your childlike curiosity. And this is 5 minutes before I'm getting on with you. And I'm like,
okay, that's just perfect. I love that.
Literally like supporting the curiosity, like so beautiful. And so, but I draw, I play with AI, I write poetry, I write songs. I photograph immensely, and I create patterns out of my photography and sell those on Redbubble. I am developing my own Oracle deck, my own tarot card deck. I create every single day. As a matter of fact, my business advisors are always like, Stephanie, we need you to like slow the creation down just a little. Like, we need to, I just published a book last night. Like I literally just, so I just constantly have ideas and allow myself to play and create all the time. Like I set aside playtime just to play, like for just that reason.
That's awesome. I like to go do dance breaks. I tend to be, yes, got to do the dance breaks. I was listening to some rocking out to some really good music right before we got on this call. I do find myself sometimes though, that a lot of my creativity has now been channeled into cooking. I never expected myself to enjoy cooking. I grew up in a very large family, and so meals were about quantity and as small of a budget as possible because I grew up on a farm in Kansas. But I never learned how to really just make more elaborate things. And COVID just is like, okay, well, I guess I've got nothing else to do. So, I mean, I had other things to do, but yeah, it's been fun. I made a terrible looking pie, but it tasted really good. Peach pie last night.
Delicious. Yeah.
It was delicious, but man, I got distracted when I was making the crust, and it was like,
those crusts are tricky.
Yeah, but it was good. It tasted good. Okay, we went on a little detour. Detours are good. You said something though about last night that you published a book.
I did.
You released your book. Okay, show us the book. What is it about? Why did you?
It's so brand new that I am waiting on my own physical copy of it. Like that's how new it is. But it is available on Amazon right now. It is.
Okay.
And it's called Brand Shadow. And the subtitle is Understanding and Overcoming Corporate Toxicity. And it is an exploration at sort of looking at that organizational shadows that we have all played a part and sort of experience.
Elaborate on is there an example that you could give us?
Yeah, like a brand shadow, like here's a real obvious brand shadow. Okay, like this one's like in the news.
Obvious is good because that way everybody
let's look at Boeing. Let's look at Boeing. And Boeing right now, as far as I know to this day, unless they've changed it, but the last time I looked, they still had engineering excellence as one of their number one core stated value. It's been their number one core stated value for over 100 years. But I think in 1998 is when they merged with McConnell Douglas. And then around 2008 really is when you would have started to see, like, probably on the inside, some real culture shifts happening with that value system. And then, planes started randomly falling out of the air and killing people, and doors flying off planes and things like that. And so this is a brand shadow that it wasn't just allowed to, permeate its own culture, creating a highly toxic culture. Boeing's culture is like, it's been well documented. It's unbelievably toxic. But it also had an impact on an entire industry. And, to the degree that they haven't been honestly held more accountable for the costs, like that we can't honestly really truly measure that in a meaningful way, even if we're just talking about, say, the cost of fear and stress to an individual person sitting on a plane, uncertain whether or not they're going to make it to their destination, and what does all of that cortisol running through their body do to their health. We don't measure costs like that. We just overlook costs like that, but there are real costs involved. And that's a brand shadow that was allowed to turn into literally an industry shadow, because it is. It's not just a brand shadow. But in an average person's environment, a brand shadow might look like, hey, we tolerate that abusive individual because they're the top producer and we don't want to lose the production. So we're going to allow them to negatively impact our culture and treat people with disrespect. That's a brand shadow. You know, basically, if you say we value people and then you don't value people, that's a brand shadow. You know, like anytime you're, as an organization, just simply not showing, I have a lot more respect for organizations that are just like, hey, we only care about profit. We're not here to value people. You are just a number to us. Here's what the contract looks like. Fine. At least I know who I'm dealing with. Thank you for your honesty. But don't sit there and tell me that I am valuable and important and all of these things, and then, you know, lay me off before I'm even allowed to start. Think about, this has been like a running thing lately where people have been getting, they receive, you know, their job, you know, they get their offer letter, and then on like the day that before they start, they get it rescinded, because organizations are like so kind of in a chaos state right now. And it, you know, again, it affects us socially. It affects us individually. So the book looks at brand shadows. It looks at it through my lens. You know, it's my experience, my perspective. It's well
your
researched.
book. You get to write what you want.
Okay. It's well researched. And it really is not just asking organizations and leaders to take a look at this, but also us as individuals. Like, how are we showing up? Are we showing up to these jobs as victims? Are we working in fear? Are we in that space where we're feeding the shadow? And how do we find our voice? How do we become more aligned? How do we illuminate the shadow? How do we integrate all that power, just as we would as individuals? And so that's the, you know, it's really an exploration and an examination of these ideas. And it's asking the individual to do that same examination along with the book. So it has, at the end of every chapter, there's questions and action items. And if you buy the book, there's actually a work guide that you can download that goes with it. So you can, like, it's like a journal. So.
Oh, that's perfect. That sounds
Yeah.
amazing. Okay. So we'll definitely put that link in the show notes so people can just click and buy, because that's wonderful. You know, as you're speaking, I can't help but you know, think that a similar thought process would also wrap around non-work environments, family systems, you know, community groups, things like that. And so I think being able to take that same mindset, the tools in this book, I imagine that you could extrapolate to a lot of other areas that you're working in. Again, one of the gifts of COVID was, I think it gave everybody an opportunity to examine how they were showing up in the outside land. I can't say the real world, because all of our world is real.
I think people examined how they were showing up in their own lives.
Yeah.
Literally, you know, is this what I value? Is this what matters? What does matter? You know, and these are important questions that we should be asking. And, you know, it gave us an opportunity. You know, one thing when it comes to creativity, that we don't really talk about a lot is how much we need stillness.
Yeah.
You know, how much that allows us to truly expand. You know, and I talk to so many people all the time, clients all the time, that they will say, I have to be moving at all times. I can't, if I'm not doing something. And a lot of that is like not wanting to sort of sit with your own body, with your own emotions. It's an avoidance factor. And so I work with people constantly on just implementing stillness practices, and not even meditation. I try to stay away from the M word too much. I think sometimes that really puts people off. I believe there's like a million different ways to meditate, and so we don't have to really, but a lot of people have a very clear, ideal of what that means for them, and it feels inaccessible. And so I really just try to talk about, like, where do you feel like you can be still? Where do you feel like you can take a breath? Where you don't even notice that you're taking the breath. Where you're
Mm.
just breathing. From
I think that's why part of the reason why I do enjoy cooking, and why it frustrates me when I get pulled out of that flow, because if you're following a recipe, you have to make sure that you get everything put in at the right time.
I used to say, one of the hardest jobs I had, where I was, working as a corporate executive, 10-hour days. I would come home and cook for 2 hours. And it was like pure meditation. And I did it every
Hmm.
night, pure meditation. And when I left that job, I enrolled in culinary school for a year. And that was like, but right now where I'm at in my life, and this is a beautiful place to be, because I've been a passionate cook for like 30 years or so. But I turned it all over to my husband. And I was like, you should know how to feed your.
Uh-oh, we've got a little bit of a hiccup here. Looks like we have a momentary glitch in the system. Um, let's see if it resolves here soon. We've had such a wonderful conversation, and I don't want it to stop yet. And it looks like I've lost Stephanie. Well, let's go ahead and tie things up, since we had that wonderful conversation. We'll go ahead and um, encourage everybody to tap into her website, go buy her book on Amazon. One of the things she was talking about was uh, rising, the chaos. And in feng shui, chaos is kind of the next thing to creation. And in the West sector is what handles that, because the West deals with the creativity and children. So what does it take to solve problems creatively? What does it take to make that mess? Again, I spoke a lot about cooking and how you make a mess while you're making your meal. And many people say, make your mess your message, and yada, yada, yada. I think that's a great idea. And at the same time, I think Stephanie's words about not being afraid of chaos and looking at it as more of a neutral energy, I cannot say enough about that approach. Anyway, we're going to cut to this particular episode just a little bit short. It's not going to be the usual 60 minutes, which is just fine, because it's really all about thinking on your feet. It's about being willing to work with with whatever shows up. I did get a text from her as we were waiting. I guess her electricity cut off. So yeah, it is Mercury retrograde when we're recording this. So that's all about flexibility and seeing how we can get creative and be curious about how good it can be. Thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to introducing you to my future guests. But for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be taking a break because I'm in the process of working on something new for the intuitive entrepreneurs out there. Have a great day, and we look forward to a wonderful week. Bye-bye.